And my real daydream, and I think you'll love this one, Andrew, I did this about 15 years ago in a conference. I said, wouldn't it be wonderful if a developer came to the local citizens jury that sits every month to hear new proposals, and the developer of whatever the project is had to explain how their project was good for country and good for people. And the ordinary citizens could sit there and go, you know what? No, that doesn't sound like it's going to add to the ecological health of our bioregion. Go away. It wouldn't be that these guys are in the position of power. It would be that local communities, fully informed and empowered by their ecological benchmarks, could say, no, clearing all of those, clearing that forest, put in houses, standalone houses with no backyards and 5 metres away from each other and no capacity for replenishing biodiversity and no capacity for ordinary families to even afford those houses is not the kind of development we want in our place. We need to rethink it and do it more creatively.
The intriguing concepts of nature-based governance and bioregionalism are two visionary system-level approaches to ecological land management which we will be exploring in this episode, using our imaginary future vision lens. Nature-based governance is an evolving framework for decision-making that centres around nature's systems, values and processes. It promotes collaboration among diverse communities, including proper recognition of Indigenous interests, and it addresses issues of power, justice and fairness to ensure long-term ecological health which respects the interests of more than human species. The allied concept of bioregionalism has been defined as a philosophy and a scientific framework that defines regions based on their natural characteristics like climate, geology and plant and animal communities rather than political boundaries. This approach seeks to create policies, cultures and economies that are in harmony with the local environment, promoting regional self-sufficiency and a deeper connection to and caring for place. The possible uses of nature-based governance and bioregionalism approaches have been further explored and refined in recent years by the Australian Earth Laws Alliance, or AELA, a visionary system-level reform advocacy organisation. AELA urges us to see human societies as part of nature. It advocates for organising governance, culture and economies within natural boundaries defined by elements such as landform patterns, river catchments and naturally occurring plant and animal communities. Both nature-based and bioregional approaches to land management offer better pathways toward regenerative, flourishing futures where the deeply interconnected well-being of humans and nature is mutually reinforcing and exists in far better balance than it does today. Hello and welcome to another episode of Imagining 2040 Pathways to Flourishing Futures, a podcast from Hope Incorporated Australia. I'm your host, Andrew Nicholson. In this episode, we're going to imagine and start to visualise what a nature-based system of governance, which supported a bioregional planning and development approach, could look like in southeast Queensland by 2040 and beyond. And joining me to explore how such transformative ideas could help replace business-as-usual approaches to land management is Dr. Michelle MALONEY, National Convener of the Australian Earth Laws Alliance. Michelle is a leading earth lawyer and advocate, and she advises communities, businesses and governments on ecocentric or earth-centred governance strategies. Her 30-plus years of work span law, economics, ethics, education and cross-cultural knowledge, demonstrating how we can build systems that regenerate rather than deplete our living world. So welcome, Michelle. Great to have you on the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Let's begin our conversation today by asking you for a short introduction on your work in 2025. And given that your professional interests and roles are so varied, perhaps you can focus mainly on how you develop the interest and energy for the nature-based governance and bioregionalism work you're doing at the Australian Earth Laws Alliance.
Thanks so much. Well, yes, given I've been working, and you're very kind, around 30, I think it's 38 years now, so I'm getting old in the tooth. What I will start with is that AELA, the Australian Earth Laws Alliance, was created by a group of interested lawyers about 11 or 12 years ago. So it built on top of a couple of decades of my own interest in whether you want to call it sustainability or environmental law or caring for country, the governance side of how we are going to be better human earthlings on this beautiful planet and this amazing continent. So we started out in life interested in how rethinking our governance structures could help us as human beings, create a survivable future, but also to care for other non-human entities and life forms and structures, etc. So this year has definitely seen, and it's great that you're interested in the bioregional, bioregionalism, bioregioning. We can talk about all the different terms people use today. It's great that you're interested in that. We've really turned a lot of our attention towards bioregioning because it's an integrated way for people to think about earth laws, rights of nature, Indigenous first laws, local economies. How do we change some of what we do, but understand our own local boundaries and our own local governance and the barriers we have, so that we can live in some kind of respectful relationship with our living world and govern ourselves as human beings more effectively and more sustainably. So this year we've done a couple of different activities. We've been running a webinar series on bioregioning with guest speakers from different parts of the world and parts of Australia. Really, our own curiosity fuels that series. We love hearing from people and learning what they're up to. We also ran an Earth Ethics conference in May with AAPAE, the Australian Association for Professional and Applied Ethics. It was a wonderful gathering of about 100 people looking across how ethics, the questions of, how do we behave, how do we do these things, how do we make decisions, can be better for people and planet. And we've actually just come off the back of co-hosting with the New Economy Network Australia, NINA, a really wonderful conference on Yugambeh country just last weekend, which is the Gold Coast. So that conference was all about pathways to a thriving future, and I'm delighted to say that I infused bioregional issues, topics and sessions into that conference. So they're just some of the things we've been doing. Also been hosting a wonderful talk fest called Kinship. We have been inviting different people from different walks of life to talk about how they perceive the human-nature relationship. So that's been a variety of Indigenous speakers through to university folks who are experts in multi-species justice, through to wonderful humans like Andrew Skiok, who talk about how deep listening to nature and his a long career of listening to and recording birds and nature sounds has taught him so much about his personal and our more broad human-nature relationship. So there's some of the things we're doing. More quietly in the background, we're working with a number of communities who are really interested in exploring what globally you would say is rights of nature. Here in Australia, we're more interested in an earth laws or earth-centred way for local people to step up their role as guardians or custodians of country. And of course, being a colonial legacy country, we have to think about what is it that folks from my peoples, my cultural group, which is folks from particularly from European descendants, but what can we do to be better guardians whilst also working in partnership with the First Nations peoples and the first custodians of country? So that's a quiet body of work that's building, and hopefully we'll have some more news to share next year about some of those initiatives.
What an excellent overview of the work you're doing. I've just had the chance, in the research for this episode to reacquaint myself, because I have dipped into it over the years as a fantastic resource. But your excellent portal website, the AELA website, which we will put links to in the show notes, and I would urge anyone listening to this that has got even the slightest interest in what Earth-based governance, Earth-centred governance, and bioregionalism and all those other issues are about, would go to your site, because it is so rich there. The resources on it, just quickly today, ecological economics, kinship, as you mentioned. You've got two or three presentations on bioregional mapping. There's one forthcoming later this month, focused in Southeast Asia. there's a ton of stuff there, and you can marinate, for want of a better term, marinate yourself in the worldview of earth-centered stuff generally, be it
I
law, be
love
it
that word.
yeah. But listen, you've already started to move us toward the future in the sense of the springboard that these fantastic educational resources are providing. And this podcast episode is largely looking to the future. So do you want to just spend another couple of minutes building on that? I'm assuming that the theory of change, which you use that very fancy term that AELA is engaged in, amongst other things, is getting the word out there, is showing that all of these different ways of rethinking governance, how we treat the natural world, creating a proper place for nature, indigenous worldviews, indigenous knowledge and wisdom, how we can tap more into that more effectively. It is, to me, an imaginative process that you're engaged in because sadly, a lot of this stuff does not actually exist at the present moment. And one simple definition of imagination is the ability to think about stuff that isn't actually there at the present time. All of this stuff is credible. It could be done. I mean, and you're working hard to make that happen. But I've got that right? Is your sort of like the organisation's general approach here, amongst other things, is to get the word out there to show that these pathways, you name some of your presentations as pathways, which I don't really love, are more than possible, are more than doable with enough support. Am I sort of not getting that, the exact...
No, I think you're totally right. But it's really interesting if we kind of reflect for a moment on our own worldview or what we think is real or what we think is happening right now. I think most people have slightly different views on how things are going and what's possible. So certainly a lot of what we do reminds people of how we used to be. And I think that's an imaginative process. And certainly in a lot of our earth laws and the sort of law reform daydreams we have, that's very normative or futuristic or imaginative. However, I would suggest that at the same time, the entire planet is full of people who come from cultures and worldviews that are earth-centered. And historically speaking, humanity, for more of its time than less of its time, has been earth-centered. So not to twiddle with words, but I do think some of what we do would be seen by many in mainstream economics, for example, as absolutely whimsical and perhaps even impossible. But if you talk to First Nations peoples on any part of the planet, they'll be talking about their governance systems and the systems of culture and care and kinship and responsiveness and custodianship and obligation that they've always had. And even despite kind of colonial disruption, they still have. And I think I'm perhaps most excited and encouraged on a daily basis by the vast number of folks who are out there doing this work all the time. Whether you go to NAILSMA, the North Australian Indigenous Land and Sea Management Group, they have gatherings every year or two, and I've been to them, and there's hundreds of people there from different cultural places across Australia already doing what Westerners would call nature-based governance and caring for country and building local economies out of, the resources on their lands in a sustainable way. You look around the world, and so much of this work is already happening. So what's the problem? I think the problem is, and I won't go into it, but I know you've heard me talk about the history of colonisation. Up until about 600 years ago, most of the planet was bioregional. Some places had large empires and large control mechanisms, but if you look at maps of North America, South America, Australia, Africa, many other places, and even to some extent Europe, was kind of, but not really bioregional, it was definitely tribal. Humanity's natural state is a little more local and a little more connected to place. And I'm reading this terrific book, which I won't go on a tangent about, but it explains an awful lot about my people. It's called The Weirdest People on Earth, Why the West is Peculiar and Peculiarly Successful. And it really explains that the European cultures that started to shift and change probably 1,000 years ago through different structures forming up through Christianity and others, change those deep relational and kinship structures into something a little different, something more structured around other aspects of life. Lots of things we could talk about there. So that's a long-winded way of saying, yes, a lot of what AELA talks about is imaginative. And I think even if we're talking about what we do in the real world practically today, we love to infuse imagination and spirit and energy And love, is love imaginative? I mean, can you put a box around love and say it's real? Or is it imaginative? We could get into that discussion. But there's just so much inspiration going on today. But the barriers are extensive and real. We know that harm is being caused through the modes of thinking that the colonial legacy brought to many places in the world, and the power structures, the hierarchies that see certain groups of people who are either new or have always been, unfortunately, controlling other people and seeing the living world as just a bunch of resources. So that's a really long-winded way of saying, yes, some of our work is imaginative, but I would really, really urge people to see what's beautiful and imaginative in the real world, because that's what we build out from. We're not just making up stuff. We're not going, oh, let's make the sky a purple colour. We're saying humanity has a history of doing things differently. In a lot of ways, our weird cultural constraints in the last 600 years are an anomaly across the last many thousands of years. How do we turn back towards understanding where we live and caring about where we live and the places that we love? So I think I went so far on a tangent, I forgot to answer your question. But in terms of the future we want, we are not prescriptive. We're not ideological. We don't say thou shalt do rights of nature this way or, whatever. What we're definitely interested in, and as you've already asked and highlighted, our whole mission in life is to increase the understanding and practical implementation of earth-centered everything, really, but with an interest in governance. And what do I mean by governance? These really are just the underpinning rules that a society creates and continues to create through social norms. 200 people on a small island suddenly find themselves there. What kind of rules would they create to share resources, and how would they reinforce those rules and norms amongst themselves as they continue their civilization? So we're interested in law, but we're also interested in the underpinning structures that have built our economic system, our political system. Some of it's law, some of it's just the social norms that have emerged with colonial practices and just maintained ongoing. So, yeah.
Lovely stuff. The very biggest picture level, trying to summarize that, but just to give a reflection on it, I think look, the framing of this podcast is unapologetically about imagination. So I've got a barrow on that, and I will keep on pushing it, and we're going to get to an exercise. But it seems to me that, as you were talking there, you could just feel that sense of imaginative uplift, the energy that comes when you break out of the little boxes of, let's say, Western mindsets, definition of linear time, of definitions of progress and advance and what that constitutes, versus we can tap into the past in the present, to see that there's always been other ways of doing development. If you want to use that term, that's a Western term, development. But I mean, there's always been other ways of doing it. And I think that was a lovely overview. And this is what we need to get back to or forward to, depending on your viewpoint. I mean, some First Nations perceptions of time is not even linear anyway. I mean, the past, present, and future, in my understanding and my layperson's understanding, is that it's a very fluid concept. They're all continuous with each other. And there have been sort of Western mindset attempts to sort of, like, if not emulate that type of more fluid view of time, but find a Western lens on that. And imagination, I think, can be a great contributor to that. But look, and you started to point to other initiatives in the present that point to the future, and we're going to have a solid section on that in our Signals of the Future section in a couple of talking segments time. But first of all, let's now come to the key imaginative exercise in this podcast episode, the imaginative heart, if you like, of the episode, where we step outside beyond business as usual roadblocks to visualize credible pathways. So this is not utopianistic or even dystopianistic. Credible pathways that could take us toward flourishing futures, rather than continuing along today's often failing development trajectories. And I would suggest to listeners, if you haven't yet listened to the series introduction, it's worth checking that out for more context on those two contrasting views of possible future trajectories open to us. So, Michelle, and our listeners out there, let's imagine we have a device that can take us forward, you forward, into the long-term future. That's to the year 2040, 15 years or so from now. And even upon immediate arrival, assuming that you've made that leap, you can already sense that this future isn't a business as usual future, it's a flourishing one. And you can sense, see, hear, and even taste somehow intuitively that it's a climate safer future world with thriving bioregions full of nature and wildlife, which are being well governed using sharp intake of breath, regular citizen participation in decision making, which has helped produce more supportive communities and a fairer economy to boot. No one is being left behind in this particular future, not humans nor more than human species. Now, still using the imagination as you glide around the landscapes or over the top, perhaps some drone-like quality to this imagination device, you're also reflecting on the major shifts that must have occurred between now and 2040 across Australia and globally. We've already been just hinting at the international scene here. And given your particular interests, you are inspired by the transformative changes and forms of development that have helped improve the governance of this more nature-based, interconnected and bioregional future world, where the quality of life has improved for all, not just the privileged few. So now you imagine you've returned to 2025, ready to share a visionary time travel report with us. So, Michelle, can you now give us a summary from that report? What did you see, hear, and feel in that flourishing 2040 future? What stood out and really stayed with you?
Yeah, what a wonderful process. Even just imagining it, it's just wonderful. So, my report would probably say something like, in the future, we are absolutely climate aware. We know that we were locked into some changes. So, a big focus along Australian communities and coastlines was ensuring that not only the hardware of society, but the software, the actual rules underpinning our society had changed. So, what I was excited about was, well, tootling from community to community, seeing notices about upcoming citizens' assemblies to ensure that the kinds of sound ecological benchmarks communities had identified and were working towards were discussed, reviewed, and renewed every couple of years. Huge number of people involved in whether they were called citizens' assemblies or citizens' juries, actually having scientists and Indigenous elders and land care people and biology experts and ordinary folks interested in residential housing could come together on a regular basis and actually look across their region, whether that was a catchment or whether the boundaries were created by other decisions that humans made, looking across their place, regularly reviewing the ecological health of their home, their homelands, regularly discussing what else needed to be changed or transformed or continued through restorative work or transitioning out of bad energy decisions towards positive energy decisions. This regular conversation about the living world and its being the foundation of life, turning on the news and hearing not just the sports update for that day or that week, but hearing the indicators that had been set by communities about what indicated health to them. Their local rivers were now swimmable. Certain fish were brought back. Certain concretised drainage places that used to be a living space had been restored. And inside of that, all of the new jobs and activities that were now valued and funded because the centre of attention was ensuring that human beings were caring for country, that country was productive for human beings, but that the unique elements of a place were understood by more and more locals, and that they were more and more involved in setting the benchmarks for ecological and social health and ensuring that day-to-day activities and long-term strategies could be changed and tweaked. So when I come back from 2040, I'm excited by the different governance structures that have enabled people, given them permission to know what's real and what's important, is that local health and caring for each other. And in 2040, a lot of people were talking about the inspiration that the days of COVID back in the 2019, 2020 period gave them, because that was when people realised local was important. And the kinds of sectors of human activity that are important are actually not those that used to be reflected in the stock market. The sectors of importance in 2040 are food, health, education, community support, and of course the living world. So that 2040 is what I would find exciting, not just the static picture of ecological health, but the endless circular time idea of people constantly paying attention to place, constantly working with each other to try to make sure that every decision was calibrating and recalibrating how governance should be, how decisions should be made. And so, to be more specific, and let's keep pretending here, I was in my little solar powered giant drone thing zooming around, and I could see that out in the dry country, like where I grew up out in the middle of Queensland, desert laws were in place for desert people. They had special laws about looking after water, looking after the dry lands, understanding the ecosystems of dry riverbeds. And their legal system for their local place was different to the people up in far north Queensland, where they've got deep, rich rainforest country. So, desert laws for desert people, jungle laws for jungle people, as well as being good citizens and sharing across bioregions, and being good citizens and paying attention to energy consumption and carbon emissions and other pollutants that affect the global commons. So I hope that's a bit of a snapshot of my little vision.
Wow, Michelle, I mean, thanks so much for that really wide ranging and uplifting set of impressions of 2040. Just to make the point, within this series, this is using future vision imagination, not just for entertainment value to create either a utopian or some sort of dystopian fantasy, but rather to help craft credible visions of possible flourishing futures, visions grounded in professional expertise, lived experience, and a public desire to achieve better development pathways to safeguard the well-being of the generations to follow. We want to help explore an intriguing question using this podcast series. What if many more people could imagine and visualize flourishing futures? Could an increase in the use of such public imagination help make achieving those futures more likely? Okay, now for a quick debrief. Because time travel can be a bit tiring, can't it, Michelle? I mean, you've done that. You've done the jump. I mean, I don't know how you're feeling. So let's do a quick check-in to confirm that you're safely back in 2025. So, Michelle, just for the sake of the exercise, what month and year is this?
I'm in October 2025, I think.
So great, we're back in 2025, and let's stay grounded in the present as we and our listeners explore another way to imagine flourishing futures by noticing what's already here and emerging in the here and now. Now, this is noticing existing initiatives which we can think of as pointers toward or signals of better ways of doing development, which, if amplified, multiplied, and extended, could increase our chances to achieve genuinely flourishing futures. Such promising opportunities, which signal directions toward better possible futures, can be found in reports of innovative new technology, progressive project case studies, promising trends in sustainability practice, and genuinely fresh, bold ideas on how to do future development. Such signals can give a glimpse of the kind of better world many of us would like to see in 10, 15, or 20 years and beyond. These aren't fantasies from utopia. They're real initiatives and they're happening now. So, Michelle, here's the second imaginative question of the interview for you on signals of the future in 2025. Within your own area of work, interest, or expertise, what do you see as some of the most promising examples of new initiatives, case studies, proofs of concept, or bold ideas that could be considered as signals of the future?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. What a great question. So, signals of the future. I think the things I'm most excited about is the rise of people who are interested in Earth centered governance. I think that's exciting. And signals for the future to me include, and this is a project I had nothing to do with, but I find it exciting, down in Victoria in 2017, when the Yarra River was recognised as a living being. It's not technically rights of nature, but there in Victoria, Aboriginal approaches and ideas and language were infused into a Western law, saying that the Yarra River isn't just a drain or a resource or a tub of water to be used. It's a living entity. And they set up the Birrarung Council, which doesn't have a veto. It can't stop unwanted developments. But from all of my queries and discussions with folks down there, It's helping to change certain people's minds about what a river is, and helping people to rethink what a living river system is all about and what you should and shouldn't do and can and can't do in a river system. So that Yarra River Act is definitely a signal for the kinds of future laws and future governance and custodianship that I think many other places will do. And that does link to some work that I'm involved in, where there's people in many rivers in New South Wales, from the Hawkesbury Nepean to the Clarence to the Macleay and several other rivers. All of the peoples along those rivers love where they live. They love the system that they're part of, and they want to be able to protect and care for the river and its living system more. So over the next few months, there are ongoing conversations about what could earth laws or rights of nature or Indigenous first laws combined with earth laws look like in Australia, where local peoples are able to articulate what the law should be to look after a place and what the obligations are on people to care for places? And what would that mean for changing the way government agencies and other corporates and others interact with the living world? So that's a big signal for me. And just quietly, one of the reasons AELA has been working very slowly and quietly in this space is, whereas in Europe, certain groups in certain places decided they wanted to recognise the rights of something, they basically work across their whole community and then move forward within a couple of years. But here in Australia, where you've got a pre-existing ancient legal system that continues today, plus you've got the Western laws that have been overlaid on top, it's a slightly more complex and challenging task, but also very rich and beautiful when people start to come together and talk about how do we create new laws that fit with a place. So that's one big signal. I think other ones are directly related to the work I've been involved in. Back in 2017, a bunch of us created the New Economy Network Australia, or NENA, where we're inviting more and more of civil society and other interested folks to talk about what a new economy can look like, a myriad of interconnected, localised and regional initiatives that are good for people and good for place. And since NENA was created, then several years later, the wellbeing economy, and the idea of well-being being a new frame that might challenge GDP. All of these ideas are emergent, connecting also to donut economics. All of these ideas are emergent, and who knows, by 2040, something like a well-being economy or something completely different could be the new measure of what a successful economy looks like. So that sort of movement of people challenging the dominant economic way of thinking, that to me is really important. I think the other signals to me, and this is nothing to do with my work or anything, but just what I admire, is the sheer volume, and I think I mentioned this before, of human beings involved in initiatives around Australia, whether they're land care, traditional owner groups, native title groups, initiatives like Fire Sticks, where people are coming back to look at country and understand the vegetation and the tree communities they live with, and trying to go back to learning cold burns and mosaic burns and the kinds of techniques that this continent is used to after many millennia. All of those people out there and all of those initiatives are absolutely signals of the future. And if I wanted to suggest what could strengthen that, I guess there would be two big things for me. Number one, we have to improve our society's ability for local communities to have a say. And that, some people think that's complex, but it really does come down to how state governments and local governments work together, and challenging the top-down nature of our colonial legal system, where the government sees itself as owning everything and then it leases things to corporates and then communities are an afterthought. We need to turn that on its head. So step one, we must have local communities enabled to have a greater say over the decisions in their local place. Many of the folks who've come to us over the years and talk about the problems they're facing with unwanted developments really find themselves stuck between a rock and a hard place, because legally speaking, they don't have a say. And it's really hard to challenge unwanted developments. So often the legal system as it is not working to support local custodianship. So we need to pull that stuff apart and change it, strengthen local people's rights, if you will, to have a say over place. And this is definitely something I'm passionate about, and AELA will be working on much more over the coming years. It mixes up ideas of local democracy with law reform, with rights of nature, and with Indigenous first laws, and it's quite delicious when you dig into it. The second thing is funding. I think anyone who's worked at the grassroots level, anyone who works outside of large corporations or governments knows that it's so hard to get long-term funding for amazing initiatives. Everyone's scrambling to do a patchwork quilt of funding support. So whether you're a philanthropist or a government agency, we need to put caring for country and caring for people first, and we need to find really cool ways to fund that work over the long term. Governments should be empowering local communities. Governments do not have the resources, even if they wanted to have all of their staff caring for country. You need to be channeling funding support and removing barriers so that local communities can do what many of them want to do: plant the trees, remove the weeds, care for local wildlife, and make better decisions on the ground. So, yeah, let's challenge those legal structures so that by 2040, or hopefully even sooner, we've got greater rights for local people to set those ecological and social justice benchmarks and then continue working for them. And we have so much money floating about in our economy, whether it's the lack of money that companies who don't pay enough tax. If some of those big corporations paid their taxes and some of that was channeled into local community work, we would be there. We would be there. So this is not a dream. This is a reality right now, and governments can play a part in making sure that some activities get phased out and other activities definitely pay their taxes. And I think we could build some of these structures much more effectively.
Really energizing selection of some actually quite well established now signals of the future that are going really well in 2025 and could go even further with the sort of support that you've just been mentioning. So thank you very much for sketching that out there, Michelle. There's tons of other stuff, it would take up, half a dozen episodes. But just feeding back on one of those, the first example you gave there of for what for us is a reimagining in Western cultural mindsets, a reimagining of the human nature relationship. But again, going back to that past, present, future sort of continuum we mentioned in the early part of the episode, taking a lead from First Nations, Indigenous views of the relationship with nature, which have been in place for tens of thousands of years, a much more stewarding, a much more considered, a much more compassionate relationship with the natural resources that they use. All doable. And it, again, just coming back to that imaginative focus of this particular section and that sort of the power of that magical introductory question, what if? I mean, it struck me that what if our listeners and other citizens out there started to actively spot their own progressive signals of the future, point us to better ways forward? And what if those citizens, as you imply, in growing alliances, demanded stronger political action to help multiply and extend such progressive signals? We can.
And I was going to say, like, to me, one of the most exciting things on the political front, and I'm not a political animal, I'm far too I was going to say introverted to be involved in politics, but I watch it. But the rise of the teals, people who are neither one party nor another, but people who are coming out of communities and care about climate, the rise of the teals over the last couple of years has been very exciting because it is a challenge to the sort of traditional worn-out two-party system with the third or fourth party knocking on the door trying to make good change. So I think we are, again, that I would probably point to that on the political scene as a good signaler for the future where, if we had a lot more diversity in our political representation, as well as my long-term dream is actually to change the way our politics work so that greater decision-making connected to healthy ecological benchmarks can happen on the ground. So, yeah.
Couldn't agree more. I see the teals, I see the independent movement, whatever you want to define it as within Australia at the federal level, certainly, as a signal of the future. I mean, it's growing admittedly off a small base, but this last federal election in May 2025 showed that, in fact, that it's not a flash in the pan. It's here to stay, and it will grow. And it's basically growing off, this is my understanding anyway, of a disenchantment, let's put it that way, of the average punter out there in the street who just thinks that two-party system is broken, it can't deliver anymore. So, look, we're imagining here a way, we're sort of really got our thinking caps on here. And as we come to the end of today's conversation, I mean, this wonderful, superb conversation, let's return to your inspiring vision of a bioregional and nature-centred, nature-coordinated, nature-based 2040, because here in 2025, such visionary and progressive ideas are unfortunately still far too often dismissed as either idealistic, unrealistic, unaffordable, or some such theme of criticism.
Yeah.
And I explore that pushback of vested interests in the introductory episode of the series, which unpacks how vested interest narratives often distort and control the narrative of, politics or whatever it might be. So this podcast is aiming to help counter that power of self-serving, can't do, business as usual mindsets by inviting the public to get involved with bold, plausible visions of better futures. One of our own visions for the podcast is to grow a community of listeners who use their imaginations to help co-create inclusive, community-led future development roadmaps and push assertively for their adoption. So, in light of that ringing endorsement of the value of assertive public future vision imagination, let's start to round off this great discussion and come to our last imaginative question and exercise of the interview. Now, this one showcases, going back to what I've just mentioned there, the imaginative idea of taking unlimited assertive actions to achieve flourishing futures, actions which cannot be resisted by vested interest pushback. So, Michelle, you've obviously done the full exercise of imagination here, because you have to imagine this time. You wake up tomorrow and discover you have gained a wonderful new power, shared with many other imaginative allies. So this is not if I ruled the world type of framing. This power, this collaborative power, is to enact bold, well-considered collaborative reforms that benefit our human and more than human communities, that is, nature and other species. But those reforms cannot be blocked by vested interest. Just imagine that. I mean, wow.
Wow. That is a fun thing to imagine.
Yes, well, you're going to get the opportunity very, very soon when I stop waffling here. And in that scenario, what are up to 3 actions you'd take immediately, let's say starting yesterday, to help steer us toward becoming, for the sake of argument, let's say a southeast Queensland region, which is more nature-based in its governance and bioregional in its planning by 2040 and beyond? These are both key goals. Nature-based governance and bioregionalism, and they're both goals. We need to achieve them if we're going to create the flourishing futures that we want to see.
Wonderful. Well, and I must confess, I feel like I'm cheating a bit, because just as you were talking, I remembered I wrote a strange little chapter for a book. I think it was only a year or 2 ago, and I'm just going to mention it because it's on my website. You can actually access the chapter. It's called Imagining Ecocentric Bioregional Law, and it's inside the Anthropocene Judgments Project, Future-Proofing the Common Law. Now, it doesn't sound like a very welcoming book to a non-lawyer, but in that chapter, we had to write the kinds of legal cases of a future that we were imagining. So what I did is I set up a scenario whereby something like COVID grabbed us all again and cast us into a bit of a darker place, and people were reconstructing their own political shape. So if I was to imagine a couple of things that could happen without political barriers, and I haven't got that article in front of me, I just remember the name of it, I would grab some ideas from what I wrote, because, let me think if I can remember them. I thought they were pretty cool, but, I wrote it. Number one, people looked to Indigenous leadership, and they didn't just look to Indigenous leadership. In my imagined future, people actually banded together in local areas and said, enough with the extractivism. Let's form up, whether you want to call them political parties. And I think I did create a political party called the Relationalist Party, based on Indigenous elder Mary Graham's wonderful articulation of relationalism, how we live and play together with each other and with nature. So number one, we changed the political scene so that Indigenous leadership wasn't disregarded, wasn't treated with abhorrent racism, was actually placed in a leadership role. So people were looking to people who had knowledge of land to say, how do we survive this future? How do we have enough food to eat? You fellas lived here for millennia and were very pragmatic. You understood place. So how do we have culture change? We all wake up tomorrow and we understand that everything comes from nature. And then we have the political change to say this is going to be at the centre of our decision making. So that's one daydream. Then the other thing I said was there was resources put aside for bioregionally oriented citizens' assemblies to be held all across Australia for 2 to 3 years, as long as it took for local communities to say, these are the boundaries that we think are relevant to how we live. So in southeast Queensland, we have a southeast Queensland bioregion, or we might all say, we're going to go for catchments, we're going to go for these ecosystems, and communities of people worked to define their place. Our place is the such and such river and its catchment. And this is what ecological health looks like for this place. And that would be taking science seriously, taking Indigenous leadership seriously, and then, as I said, creating the kinds of benchmarks that say we live, for example, in a semi-tropical or subtropical terrain. We used to have all of these forests, we now have less. We used to have more clean rivers and now they're dirty. How do we set the kinds of benchmarks that we as ordinary citizens can continue to work towards and build our future governance on? Because how do we know where we're going if we really don't have a clue what our local healthy ecosystems should look like and can provide? And then once we understand how they kind of should look, it would be a true argy-bargy, and I know that, but, no worse or weirder than the colonial legal system that was brought here in 1788, where only a group of rich white men could make decisions. We work out together what a healthy place looks like, and then we work out together, how do we maintain that forever? What changes do we need to make in our consumption patterns, in how we live and share? The so-called housing crisis, the so-called crisis of cost of living crisis today is in one of the richest countries on earth. So these so-called cost of living crisis is something that I believe is created by corporate and government decision-making and values and priorities. We know we have collected tax revenue that could change the system completely. The governments choose not to prioritise it. So removing all the barriers, not just opening up local democracy, but actually changing the foundation of what is important and how do we make our decisions in a place. And my real daydream, and I think you'll love this one, Andrew, I said this about 15 years ago in a conference. I said, wouldn't it be wonderful if a developer came to the local citizens jury that sits every month to hear new proposals, and the developer of whatever the project is had to explain how their project was good for country and good for people. And the ordinary citizens could sit there and go, you know what? No, that doesn't sound like it's going to add to the ecological health of our bioregion. Go away. It wouldn't be that these guys are in the position of power. It would be that local communities, fully informed and empowered by their ecological benchmarks, could say, no, clearing clearing that forest, put in houses, standalone houses with no backyards and 5 metres away from each other and no capacity for replenishing biodiversity and no capacity for ordinary families to even afford those houses is not the kind of development we want in our place. We need to rethink it and do it more creatively. So I think that's a bit of a ramble, but I'm excited by the idea that one day, and this will definitely happen, whether climate change drives us back to this way of thinking or whether we're wise enough to get there before the place is wrecked, one day we will wake up to ourselves and realise that the living world is everything. And it has to be front and centre. And there is no social justice if we don't have enough to eat. So we have to work on both of those aspects, caring for country and caring for each other. So I think I sort of answered your question, but please let me know if you want more.
You answered it to the nth degree. If you can find that document, and we'll put a link to that in the show notes, it is an excellent example, to my mind, of the use of imagination to visualise, flesh out a preferred picture of a better, flourishing future that takes, in the case that you had been describing, proper account of the close interconnections between our natural world, our human communities, and our economies. The type of scenario that were fleshing out there. Scenarios being development is a technique from foresight work in thinking about the future, proactive terms. And then possibly you imagine this preferred future, in quite concrete ways, a scenario, and then you can so-called backcast the intermediate steps that would be required to get from here to that preferable situation. So, and you were doing this, 15 years ago? So, again, it's showing that, amongst other things, yes, we can be pragmatists. We need to be pragmatists to crack on with the concrete steps to advance progress. But to some extent, that pragmatism needs to be fueled by imaginative thinking outside of the box.
Oh,
Otherwise,
absolutely. Absolutely. And, I love your description of, it's almost a standard Western way of thinking about problems, which is, how do we get to the future we want? How do we backcast the steps we can take now? And I'm a great believer that if we actually have a vague vision even of what we want, but start to take the steps of analysing the current problems and trying to shift the system to solve some of the initial stuff, but with a vision in the back of our minds or the foreground of our mind, other opportunities will also appear. So, we have to be fairly clear in articulating what we don't want, fairly clear in articulating what we do want, but the how we get there can be diverse, and the road may change its path and other opportunities may come up, So I think that human creativity and imagination is, well, really, a lot of people say, and it's a cliche, it is the thing that really does make a human being a human being. I'm sure my beautiful dog who's stretched out at my feet imagines dinner time at breakfast time, but I'm not sure if he imagines how to recreate the governance structure in the family so he can get his food sooner. So if it is the one good thing humans are, you know, known for, or that we've evolved to do very well, then let's harness that and let's stop thinking that it's all done and dusted, and that, there the classic Tina situation that people used to say that there is no alternative. That was the greatest trick that capitalism and neoliberalism ever pulled, was convincing people there was no other way to think about the world. And anyone who loves history will know that humanity hasn't always lived like this. This is an anomaly in time, and it won't always be like this. Things will change for better or for worse, so let's step up and try to make them for the better. All human beings have the potential for wisdom, and do not underestimate the power of the culture that you're born into. It takes a lot of energy and effort to think outside the culture we're born into. I know because, it wasn't until my 20s that I started to really question, when I started doing my law degree, question why the heck things were the way they were. And it's taken decades to sort of really unpack a lot of the stuff. So with compassion, we see that humans are born into systems. No single person made the mess we're in. No single generation made the mess we're in. So it's hard work, but, together it can also be fun. And there's a ton of people doing it. So, yeah.
And folks, the listeners out there, we've been talking here about, future, imaginative future thinking, scenario development, backcasting. These are technical terms. If any listener wants a bit more insight, in straightforward English on any of that stuff, also the so-called futures cone of Joseph Voris that nicely sets out this interrelationship between possible futures, preferred futures. Go to the show notes link on the introductory episode of the IMAG 40 podcast series, Imagining 2040, or go to the Hope Incorporated Australia website, where we've put in a little sort of primer, if you like, very basic primer on future and foresight thinking. So coming back to yourself, Michelle, again, what an inspiring set of ideas, imaginative ideas, brilliant overview there. Once again, so energizing, uplifting to hear imagination pointing us toward possible actions to achieve better could do and can do futures, as opposed to hearing the long list of business as usual reasons why we can't do future development in genuinely progressive ways. And you were thinking about that 15 odd years ago. So,
well, I'm sure a lot of other people are too, including yourself. May I say that I think this podcast is visionary, and it's exciting to be part of it, because often day to day we don't get invited to think of this way. So good on you and your crew for dreaming up this series. I'll be listening to all of them with great anticipation.
Well, I think also, just off the back of that comment, the really exciting thing about this podcast, but it's a very modest little contribution, but there is a very growing interest in the use of trying to boost public future vision imagination, because there is an identified, and this is perhaps not surprising, but it has been identified through social science research, and a public imagination deficit at the present time, in the sense of the ability of the public en masse, or in greater numbers, to think proactively about preferable futures at a collective societal level. Yes, they do it at an individual level, I mean, that's one of the major ways that anyone motivates themselves, into the future. You set yourself tasks, whether it's, about weight loss, about, getting more financially straight, whatever it might be. By definition, you have to imagine a future scenario that's not yet in existence, but you use that as a goal and you move towards it. So this is a well-practiced set of skills at the individual level, but when it's coming to thinking about how society as a whole could move forward, it seems, sadly, that for a number of different reasons that we can't go into now, the public aren't thinking about that in any great numbers. And so this podcast, along with a few other pioneer podcasts, we're trying to make a small contribution to helping reverse that trend. But anyway, Michelle, do you have any parting words of wisdom for our audience, a pithy comment perhaps, which summarises your core message or messages, or perhaps a suggestion for how listeners could get more deeply involved with the work, with the ideas and initiatives we've been discussing today? Whatever you want to say in closing, Michelle.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, look, firstly, if you're interested in anything that we do at the Australian Earth Laws Alliance, we're very small and we have heaps of volunteers, and we're always keen to have new people come and join with us or invite us to join you in your initiatives in the community and in your place or in your academic space. But I think the only advice I ever give anyone is find what you love, find what you've got energy to be involved in, whether that's looking after wildlife or challenging the political system or inventing a new widget that's made of mushrooms instead of fossil fuels. Whatever you do, find the stuff you love so that you've got the energy to keep going, join with others, and never give up, because I do believe you have doona days where we jump under the doona and think, wow, it's tough out there, but hang on and keep working with other great people, keep finding inspiration, because nothing is set and nothing is for certain. So hopefully we can just keep all contributing to something that's a lot better for our future and our children and their grandchildren, and not just the human grandchildren, but the birds and the bees and the bats. So that's about it from me.
What an inspiring way to round off today's conversation, Michelle. You've shared such thoughtful, energising ideas about the kinds of development pathways we could take by 2040 and beyond to help move us toward regenerative, flourishing futures in which the deeply interconnected human and ecological health and well-being of our communities here in southeast Queensland and elsewhere is mutually reinforcing and exists in far better balance than it does today. You've certainly given me, and I imagine many other listeners, plenty to reflect on. And so now over to you, our audience, our growing community of visionary thinkers. What will you take from today's imaginative conversation on the possibilities for creating flourishing futures which centre nature-based governance, bioregionalism and genuine forms of citizen participatory democracy across development decision-making? Each of our episodes invites you to join this experiment in future visioning. What if a podcast like this could help spark the shift we need toward more just, sustainable development pathways? What if more citizens harnessed their imaginations to map out preferable, credible futures and advocated politically to make them real? Only time will tell if we can answer such questions. Meanwhile, we hope this episode inspires your own imaginative conversations in homes, workplaces, communities and beyond. You might ask yourself, what could a flourishing 2040 look like for you and those around you? How might our imaginative podcast exercises, time travel, signals of the future and bold actions help you reflect and communicate your hopes? And if you're enjoying the series, please share it. Word of mouth helps grow our audience and build a community committed to flourishing futures. We'd love to hear from you. What resonated or challenged you? Send your thoughts via email, social media or voice message. Details are in the show notes for each episode and on the Hope Incorporated Australia website. Suggestions for future guests, topics or format improvements are also always welcome. This podcast, we hope, is a collaborative journey and your input can help shape what comes next. So until that next time, keep your imaginations alive, keep wearing your Flourishing Futures hat and keep sharing ideas about how, together, we can reimagine development pathways toward a thriving, flourishing 2040 and beyond. My name is Andrew Nicholson, host of Imagining 2040, and thank you so much for listening. Hope Incorporated Australia, providing podcasts, research and community educational outreach to help achieve our vision of a society which is sustainable and just, ecologically, socially and economically. For more details on our work, please visit our website at www.hopeaustralia.org.au.